What's up everyone, it's Adkins here again, and today I'm going to do a video on, basically a tutorial video on how to make beer and or wine. So, the processes for either beer and wine are pretty much the same. Generally there are a few different steps between the two. Personally I find wine to be a little bit easier and, quicker to make. I guess there's less steps in the making of it. Basic wine anyways, because you have whole variation of the level of quality of wine. So, but for this I'm going to go over just some of the basic equipment you need to be able to do either of those. We're going to start out with what I think is probably the most important part when making beer and wine, which is a hydrometer. And this is a hydrometer. So what a hydrometer is basically you take this and you drop it inside here. This is a graduated cylinder, and what you can use that for is it'll tell you how much sugar you have in there, what your potential alcohol will be with said sugar, and it'll also tell you what your specific gravity is, which you can use specific gravity to calculate both your potential alcohol and how much sugar you have in there. So this I would say personally is one of the most important parts, because you can use it to get the sweetness you want for your wine, and also make sure you have the amount of alcohol you want in it. Make sure you're not putting too much sugar in to have your fermentation seize up, or even you're putting enough sugar in there to get the alcohol that you want. Also to make sure that your fermentation has actually started and is actually going, and see when your fermentation has stopped. So this right here is a very important tool, and if you want to make beer and or wine, you need one of these. So you see two cases here. There are actually two different types of hydrometer. This one right here is a beer and wine one, so this gives specific gravity, Brix, and potential alcohol. This one right here is a proof and trails hydrometer. It's basically the same thing, but this one is used for testing the amount of alcohol in liquor. So the only things this gives is your potential alcohol. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like your proof and your trails. I'm not really sure what your trails are. Never really did any research on that, but your proof, we all know what that is. That's how much alcohol is in your spirit. Alright, going on from there, one of the really important things that you need to have is sanitizer. So this is a food safe sanitizer. You don't have to rinse it off of anything. This is called Star San. And you basically mix that with water. Inside we have it in a bucket. And anything that's going to touch your wine during the fermentation process and bottling process needs to be sanitized, like really, really well, because anything on there can end up spoiling your wine, getting people sick, or your beer even, and stuff like that. So a sanitizer is really important. And like I was saying with this is a food safe. So in your bottles, you put it inside drop the stuff inside your bucket, and you have it filled up, and when you dump it out and all that stuff, you don't have to worry about rinsing it. You can leave the bubbles and the film and all that stuff that's in there. And then what this right here is a 1 gallon growler. You can make, I use these as fermentation vessels. So this one, when I'm making a small batch, which I'm going to do a video of that a little bit later, making a small batch of wine, I use that. When I'm making big batches, I have my 5 gallon carboy right there for that. So, and what these are is you basically put for your wine you put your must, or for your beer you put your I can't even remember what it's called right now, but you put your wort. You put your wort inside these for that to make it. So going on from there, we have this right here and this right here. So these are just different types of caps and anti-siphon filters, or locks. So basically, this goes in here, and this goes in here. These are called S-locks. So basically you fill them with water. This one already has a little bit in it, and it keeps any oxygen from getting down, or any air or anything like that from getting down into your fermentation vessel. So you don't get any nasty bad stuff in there with it. And what happens is during fermentation, CO2 builds up and it pushes out, and the water in here bubbles. As far as during primary fermentation, there are a lot of people who there's a lot of controversy over it. Some people say not to have a cap and a S-lock, or bubble, or there's a different kind of this. It's kind of like a cup, and it's got a thing in there. You fill it up. I prefer the S-Locks. But whether or not to use one of these during primary fermentation, because during fermentation it needs oxygen, and this keeps oxygen from getting into it. Personally, I always use one of these during the whole fermentation thing, and I haven't really had any problems. The only time I've had a problem with my fermentation is when I added too much sugar. So basically on that, do your research, find out what you prefer. Like I said, I prefer to use these the whole time, and I haven't had any issues with it. So, yeah. I already went over this. This is the cylinder for the hydrometers. You fill this up with whatever you're testing. So how I like to do it is I'll take the juice that I'm using for my wine at first, and I test just the juice itself and get my my Brix and my specific gravity and everything like that, so I know what the sugar level of the juice is to begin with, which I use to calculate how much sugars I want to leave in at the end of the fermentation, so I can have, add a particular taste to my wine. Instead of having to back sweeten, I like to use the sugars already in there. And what back sweetening is after you have your wine done, you add sugar and or juice into it, and that adds some sweetness back into the wine and all that stuff. So, but if you didn't stop fermentation and all that stuff on it, you have a chance to have fermentation restart if you do that. So, there's a sanitizer. I'll move all this stuff over here. Other things that are important, some of them more important for making beer than wine, is one, a large pail, or not a pail, but pan. What this is used for is that's a brewing pan. So when you're making, and that's typically used more for beer than it is for wine, even though yes, sometimes you do boil your wine and all that stuff. That's if you're making it with wild fruit instead of actually already produced juice. Can you hand me one of those juices over there? So, like a juice. This is how I usually make my wine. I usually just have the juice, and this is for the wine that I'm going to be making later. I'm going to make just a regular white wine with some white grape juice. But yeah, if you're using actual fruit and whatever, you want to boil it. Make sure you get any wild yeast or anything like that out of it. So you'll use a large bucket. When you boiled it, you of course want to cool it back down to a temperature to be able to do stuff with, because it won't ferment if it's too hot. So you'll need one of these guys. This is, I made this myself, because they're really expensive if you buy them, but you can, it's just a really basic thing. Basically what it is called a immersion chiller, and you plug this into a hose and it runs water through it, and this end over here the water comes out, so the water runs through the whole system and it chills your wort or your must, and then it dumps the hot water, because it would have transferred heat into the water, dumps the hot water out into the sink, and in turn chills your wort or your must if you've boiled it and you need to chill it. So like I said, that's usually used in making beer, because when you make beer you have to boil and also steep your oats to get the sugar and everything out of it. Another thing that you'll want, and this is more for the end process of it, is a bottling bucket. So just a normal bucket, but you have a spigot on it to hook your bottling wand up to bottle, to put your stuff in it. So you put, when you're done with fermentation, you put your beer, your wine in there, and then you use this guy right here. This is your bottling wand. So basically what it is, you plug this onto the little spout there. You have that on a high level, like counter or tabletop or whatever, and you put your bottles down at a lower level, and you drop this into the bottle, and it pushes a button which starts filling your wine or your beer into a bottle, and then when you lift it up, it stops pouring. So that's your bottling wand, and that's really useful. So another item that we have is, this is a racking cane. This is used for certain steps during the brewing process or the fermentation process to transfer stuff out of your fermentation container. So say this one, we have this filled with wine, and it's nearing the end of its fermentation, and we want to move this over into another container, because we actually do have two of them. We have two of each because it's a good idea to. So you'll put it in there and you start siphon by pumping it, which is going to pull stuff through and it's going to create a siphon effect. And you can transfer your wine out of another container without disturbing the lees. And the lees, or rice cake, as you call it, or as it is also called, is a thick layer of sediment that builds up at the bottom of the fermentation vessel. And basically what that's from is it's husks from dead yeast. There's also actually live yeast that's in it, and it's just any solids that may be in the juice or whatever that have settled down there. Another thing you want is a good stirring device. This is a brewer's spoon, so stirring paddle, whatever you want to call it. So we use this to stir when we have it in the brewing pan, or even in the bottling bucket if we need to stir it for whatever reason. Some people actually use buckets for their fermentation. I just use the carboys the whole time myself. Then of course, if you're making beer, I mean, I guess even sometimes with wine, you can cap it. This is a bottle capper. We don't have any bottle caps with us, but it's really easy. Take the cap, set it on your bottle, put this over the top, and it caps it down. So really simple, really basic, really easy. Alright, and then some of the more advanced things, you have a bunch of different additives here that you can put into it. So we've got right here, this is a yeast energizer. So, and this is used to just make your yeast healthy, make your yeast ferment a little bit better. This is a yeast nutrient. Again, this just kind of feeds your yeast and makes sure they create alcohol like they're supposed to sufficiently or efficiently. And this is potassium sorbate. This is used to not necessarily stop fermentation, but cause fermentation to slow. Not slow, but basically what it does is it causes the yeast to not breed, reproduce and all that stuff. So what happens is after they don't reproduce, they're going to continue to create alcohol until they die off. But once they've died off, then it'll stop fermenting. So it doesn't directly stop fermentation, but it does eventually cause fermentation to stop. And then this is diammonium phosphate. This is another yeast nutrient, just another thing used to feed your yeast and keep them fermenting well. This one right here is called Campton tablets. This is another kind of sanitizer. You can actually dissolve these tablets in water and use them as we use the star sand. But what these are used for is you'll drop them in at certain points of your fermentation. If you're doing wine with wild yeast, or not wild yeast, with wild, like actual fruit, you can drop this in at the very beginning when you have your juice and your must and everything at the beginning. You can put these in, some of these inside your must or even your wort, and leave those in there for about 24 hours before you try to start fermentation, and this will kill off any of the bad stuff first. And then you also put that in at the end of your fermentation to stabilize or help stabilize your wine. It'll kind of sanitize it, clear anything out, make sure that you don't end up with any wild yeast in there restarting fermentation or any bacteria or anything like that. This guy right here is called isinglass findings, and what this is a way to clarify your beer or your wine. So at the very end of fermentation, after you've got everything done, this is usually one of the last steps you'll do. You'll drop this in there and let that set for a few days, and it kind of makes a thick layer, and it just pulls all the solids out of your beer or wine all the way to the bottom of the container, and then you rack it out. You can also do that by what's called cold crashing, or for beer it's called lagering. You let it sit in a refrigerated area for a period of time, and that'll help settle all your solids out of solution. So you can also do a combination of the two. My last batch of wine that I made, we did cold crashing on it, and it turned out pretty good. We didn't use any isinglass findings. I may do one of the future wines, I may do isinglass findings and a cold crash, see how that works. And I do at some point want to try to make a lager, but those take a long time, so right now I'm trying to do short types of stuff. So, and then another thing you need is yeast, and this yeast is for wine right here, or this is a champagne yeast. This is Red Star Premier Blanc active dry yeast. This is for making champagne, and basically just yeast, like $1 a pack, and it's specifically bred for making wine and stuff. So this is everything you need to make. I mean, it's not a really advanced wine, but it's, you know, it's more than a basic wine. Honestly, you can do something as simple as having your juice. Obviously, you'd empty a little bit out, add some yeast in there. You really don't need the special yeast like this. You can do it with bread yeast. That will affect the flavor of your wine, though. Just telling you, like, using bread yeast will give you a little bit of a bready taste to your wine. But if you were desperate enough and you just wanted to make some wine real quick that you could drink and didn't really care too much how it tastes, you could take a container like this, or just a thing of juice just like this, you know, empty some out, put some yeast in there, and cap it off with a balloon and let it go, basically. And you could, you know, have that bit of wine done in 3 or 4 days to be able to drink. It's not going to taste very good, but it will be wine and it will it will work. And then just stepping up, you getting different tools and different things. But no matter what, if you're going to make wine, I would suggest at minimum you have your hydrometer, your graduated cylinder, and I would say you'd want to do it in actual fermentation, something like one of these, and having it sanitized. Other than that, that's really all you'll need to make beer or wine. And I'm going to get started on some white wine in one of these. So, yeah, with that, stand by, and you will see my video of making this wine here in the near future. So, obviously making wine does take a little while. Like for a good wine, this will probably take a week to a week and a half to do to end up as a fairly good wine. So, I'll have a video of the first few steps up that you'll see. The first steps of the starting fermentation, everything like that, and then probably in a week or two I'll have a second one up with, you know, any rackings or stuff like that I've done. Alright, well, y'all enjoy, and hopefully you get to make some good wines or beers. Show me, or make sure you let me know about anything. Give me any comments or any questions or anything down below.